So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another tournament replay. This is the first replay as well that we've seen from the second round of fixtures. Of course, Swiss-style rules applying in this tournament, and that's a whole thing. If you want to find out what that is, I'm sure that you can look that one up, but we'll go straight in with the battle replay here with the final phases of the tournament where it turns into more of a knockout affair, not yet decided. We have, once again, a repeat of a team that we have seen in the previous round with ALEXIOS and Batu playing as Lothlorien and Harad respectively, seeing if they can build upon the win that they had in round one. That replay, of course, we saw from the opposition team's perspective. This one we shall be seeing from theirs, and they will be facing off against Wafflez and Tundrasfox playing as Erebor and Canned respectively. So let's see first of all the army for the player that we're going to be seeing the replay from the perspective of entirely, and I'm kind of glad it's Lothlorien because they have the highest proportion of units that can hide in their main army, so we won't have to worry about them popping in out of nowhere. Karen Amroth's Staff Masters at the front. I mean, directly opposite the Dwarves is an interesting one for Lothlorien. Among the Elves, they do have access, or more ready access, to melee armour piercing than the other Elves, but of course one of their main strengths is also archery, which the Dwarves are pretty good at counteracting just through their sheer survivability, though Erebor don't have the range. So it is kind of a strange matchup where both sides can counter one another's strengths, but also are strangely vulnerable to one another. But as I was saying, the Staff Masters, more or less just a purely defensive infantry with huge amounts of melee defense for the tier of unit that they are. They do, I think, still have armor piercing, but a very low base damage means that it just gives them that little bit of extra edge against armored units, which will be useful against the Dwarves here. A couple of units of them. More units that can hide, which is going to leave the Dwarves a little bit confused because all of these units being hidden in the undergrowth means it's kind of difficult to gauge where Lothlorien are and where their strengths may lie. But the Galathrim Warriors are going to be a very important unit for dealing with the Dwarves here, because this is the melee armor piercing force that Lothlorien have that other elves really don't. Although, again, it really does depend on where they get put into melee, because of course even the elves, they do have a little bit less melee defense on axes like this, but for the most part they should be fine. Units that can be seen by the Dwarves already are standard Lorien Spearmen, very lightweight. I mean, they're good enough in melee because of decent stats, but lower armor and lower numbers does mean that their lightweight nature may be a bit of a problem if momentum is in the favour of the red team, because they're going to start to get pushed out of the way pretty quickly. But as long as they can control the situation, their stats should help them. We have a ballista over here, the Elven Ballista crew, with wielding their glaives, which gives them an anti-cavalry edge, which could be useful in a matchup like this. The ballista will try and force the Dwarves into moving forwards into the kill zone. I mean, this is going to be a fast and frenetic fight based on how few frames there are in the grand scheme of things, so we'll see how that goes. Some upgraded Sindar Blade Masters, so of course the two-handed swordsmen, which while they don't have armor piercing, still have the necessary damage to be able to be a real problem for anything other than the highest tier of dwarves with the thickest of armor. So regular dwarven units will still not want to get involved with them at all. Very sort of far-flung army, this Lothlorien. Galathrim Nobles, Silverthorn arrows can make counter-skirmishing pretty difficult, but when it comes to Erebor's crossbows, I'm not really sure how that particular back and forth is going to go, though it will make the dwarves advance a little bit more tricky if they do get forced into it by the ballista. Silverthorns are the sort of thing which can make that even more of a pain, so we shall see. The dwarves are not known for their speed either. Throwing axes are going to be another important tool in Lothlorien's arsenal here. Again, huge base damage. It's the sort of thing which can be really useful against phalanx units and other such defensive bastions. Kindred of Caliborn, of course, are also one of Lothlorien's finest melee units, so we shall see. And also completing the triumvirate of Lothlorien's bodyguard units, so lots of money, a very quality heavy army here from ALEXIOS. Other Galathrim riders, just the mounted version of the Galathrim nobles we've already seen. But horse archers have been very useful in these open field battles in the tournament so far, which is good. It speaks well of how they've been rebalanced and how their mobility is incredibly handy. Karen Amroth Rangers, another archer option, this time pure damage focus, and they do have a two-handed sword on their backs as well. Good amount of damage getting pumped down range by them. More Sindar Blade Masters at the back and some standard Lothlorien cavalry as well. So again, these regular lancers have also been pretty handy to have so far in the tournament. It's very expensive for the elves to bring units like this, but it has paid off for even more fragile forces like Mirkwood in the past. unconventional allies are going to be Harad here. We've seen them as well. Demons of the Desert and Trollmen of Harad and Champions of Nafrat, so a huge armor-piercing core, and all of Harad's scariest stuff is going to go over and help Lothlorien, and this makes sense. They're facing off against Canned over on this side, and the armor-piercing will be far more useful against the Dwarves. It makes any Dwarven advance a bit of a scary prospect for Wafflez, but we'll see. All of that resource, however, does mean that the main force is going to be presumably facing off against the Candish advance, is going to be a bit undermanned and a bit underqualified for the role. Haradrim Ballista here with the Southron Warband again, another means to try and force Canned into the offensive, which they should absolutely be willing to take based on Harad's force here. I mean, the Southron Pikemen with the dismounted Serpent Guard in the front is a decent defensive force, outnumbered though you would worry for them, but the Serpent Guard are also pretty well set up for facing off one-to-one against the equivalent Candish units, so could be an efficient use of their time and resources. Haradrim Spearmen here as well. Very low tier, of course, but just here to back them up. I mean, I suppose the wild cards over here are going to be the Haradrim cavalry unit, starting off with the Serpent Horse Archers riding their camels, a reasonably heavy Horse Archer unit, which are also going to be pretty good in melee against other cavalry, as camels tend to be. So again, it could be a good counter to any Candish cavalry that wants to try and get around the flank. Some standard Serpent Guard also here to maybe do some damage to the Candish infantry advance, should it be available to them. And then, as always, the Mumakil. We've seen them be both brutally effective and a relative non-entity. Well, actually, no, it was the Beast of Gorgoroth that we saw be brutally effective. The Mumakil in the last battle, same class of unit, but even the mere threat of the Mumakil running through the line can be a real problem for opposition teams. So, not exactly the biggest army from the blue team, lots of quality units being employed, lots of cavalry, so I think the more numerous force, certainly in terms of infantry, is probably going to be the red team, although Canned have got a fair amount of cavalry by the looks of it as well. Moving forward, or having their units at the front here, defending their skirmishers, Brotherhood of the Spear, very heavy unit of spearmen, big shield value, good quality as well, actually, those Yari spears as well, more damaging than you would expect. Nomadic archers, good unit of skirmishing archers this. I mean, Harad, by the looks of things, don't have any foot-based archers, so in terms of moving forwards and maybe doing a bit of damage over a longer period of time, that's where the red team could come into play, but the ballista is the fly in the ointment there, as always. Moving a little bit further back, we have the Variag warriors, again, upgraded as they are. Pretty good choice against both Harad and the elves. Against the elves, it just makes them a little bit more able to withstand them in melee. Against Harad, especially the lower tiers, it means that they're going to be having a decent advantage in melee, other than against the Serpent Guard, I would presume. But yeah, interesting to see how they get on. The Hwacha is here also. I mean, again, this could be really, really good for the red team. We saw the Hwacha not really able, and it was actually against this same opposition, so Batu and ALEXIOS have previous for facing down Canned's Hwacha and dealing with it accordingly, but I think that was because of an unwillingness to use it aggressively early on. If Tundrasfox is willing to do that here, good amount of damage could be done, and it could also curtail their availability of the ballista. Windriders of Canned, again lighter cavalry, wielding a sword, going to be trying to shut down any sort of cavalry advance from the opposition. The Mumakil could be a bit of a problem there though. We also have the Blood Trolls of Canned. Again, in terms of heavy hitting, there's probably nothing on the field that's going to deal the kind of shock damage that these guys are going to be capable of dealing, but again, both Harad and Lothlorien with their heavy hitting units do have the ability to burn these guys down a little bit more quickly than they otherwise would be. Nurad Windblades here, very quick, very good at dealing with enemy cavalry, but unshielded could prove to be an issue. Chieftain's Vanguard and Brotherhood of the Wain, crossbow wielding chariots, looks like 2 units of them as well, as a unit of very heavily armoured horse archers. So yeah, Canned's infantry force was not their main priority either. They're going very much for their mounted divisions. Interesting to see how that pans out as well. It looks like even the dwarves have gone in for that as well, with Wafflez also bringing chariots, so putting a lot of eggs into the chariot basket here of the red team, which is all well and good, but chariots are pretty good at disrupting infantry lines first and foremost, and I mean, I guess Lothlorien have got more of the infantry on their side of things, so I don't know, this could be a chaotic one. Ironfoot Hammerguard, another really good unit for dealing with enemy cavalry in melee. That combined with the Nurad Windblades means that the red team will be hoping for a static cavalry fight. A little bit further in front we've got Dwarven Miners, we've got the powerful Sons of Durin. I mean, as far as shock infantry goes, they're very good, and the armor piercing will be useful against Lothlorien, but not as useful as it will be the other way round. Iron for axe throwers, several units of them. I mean, they should be pretty damn good against the elves as well. Big base damage, again, especially against the unshielded shock infantry. This is where the dwarves could really clean up. Ironfoot pikes, unsurprisingly, on the front line with crossbows in the middle of the two units, kind of like living battlements, really. But again, they certainly don't have the ranged advantage. They do have the armor and shields to be able to weather a decent elven storm, but they're going to need to get into range and start picking away at some of the more impressive elven units, really. And then some Ironfoot warriors and dwarven miners on the flank. So without further ado, we will get this show right on the road. I'm sure that there's going to be a fairly liberal use of half speed being used at points in this battle, purely because it's not the longest of battles, and I think we're going to see aggression pretty quickly. I mean, the red team in many ways are going to be forced into being hyper aggressive by the artillery, I think. I mean, it does kind of depend on the Watcher as well, but their composition would suggest, with all their chariots and Kandish cavalry, that aggression is on the cards. And again, Lothlorien with their numbers and Harad with their overall compositions, it's not the best force when it comes to dealing with a cavalry swarm. They don't have the levels of phalanx units and crossbows and really high damage skirmishers that would be able to curtail that. I mean, the Serpent Horse Archers, I think, are really going to have to earn their keep in this particular battle as we have a closer look at them, because they really are the best all-round defence against the forces that can seem to have amassed. Meanwhile, ballista bolts sailing overhead, none of them hitting just yet, but the longer the red team do stay static, the more likely a good hit does become. But the artillery hasn't really been the match winner in any of these pitch battles. Of course, this is the deciding game as well, let's not forget, of the series. As I've said, I will be showing only really the deciding game of the series, whether that be the first or the second pitch battle that goes on. It's just a more efficient thing to do, I think. But the Haradrim infantry force on this little hillock is going to be the first thing tested, and it is going to be at the hands of the Kandish infantry by the looks of things. I mean, the Brotherhood of the Spear are going to be forced really into a rapid advance. I mean, they need to stop that ballista from firing, and the ballista can't exactly get out of the way as the dwarven force starts to get hit. I mean, the Haradrim ballista crew could very well start to get some friendly fire if they're not careful. Nomadic archers very, very close to the Haradrim lines now, but a Kandish spear line is going to be tested by several units of Serpent Guard. Khans need to get some of their Veriag warriors into the front line as well if they don't want their initial very thin line of spears to be utterly overwhelmed by the Harad infantry, which this is where Harad were technically at their weakest. So if they are able to get a victory here, that would be a bit of a disaster. Serpent Guard thinking of charging forward, but they were going to get caught on the side of the Brotherhood of the Spear, so think against it in the end. Southron pikemen on the way forwards as well. Some of the Veriag warriors are attacking. The Harad ballista may have got a couple of decent hits into the dwarves as they move forward, but now it's purely the elven one which is getting some good hits on the way forwards. Or Wafflez, I should say, really trying to... Oh, and now this is the problem with having that pike crossbow split. The elves threading the needle nicely there, charging into the crossbows, and that will do a decent amount of damage, and it will also disrupt the rhythm of the dwarven advance, which has been already here in these very early stages been a little bit of a difficult one for them. Another ballista bolt flying overhead, hitting a Son of Durin and a few pikes. It's already doing its job. It doesn't necessarily need to get sheer volume in terms of kills, but also the Harad ballista here. Yeah, this has probably been the most effective use of artillery in one of these pitch battles in the tourney that we've seen so far. Again, part of it is down to good fortune when it comes to artillery, whether or not they're able to get those hits or not. Ballistas may be a little bit more reliable than the rest, but we've seen even them be not ideal in these battles so far. But this has been a very good start for the blue team. Their composition's doing exactly what they had hoped for. the Brotherhood of the Spear now being reinforced and including a little bit of a flanking motion from the Variag warriors as well. But they're going to need to be a little bit more aggressive with their cavalry here. They brought all of this for a reason, the red team. And they're going to need to get in and amongst them. The longer that they simply stay here, the longer that the missiles from the camel riders, the Mumakil, and I think as well over there, based on some of the blue streaks in the sky, the Elven Horse Archers have made their way over as well. Excuse me. But yeah, the longer they stay here, the more damage it's going to do. And you can see here the Chieftain's Vanguard, very tanky unit of Horse Archers, but all on their lonesome. They're not going to win these kind of skirmish fights. They're going to need these chariots in, and they're going to need that to happen quickly, I think. With that as well, they could be able to really do some hefty damage to the Haradrim line, especially now that slowly but surely they are going to start to gain a bit of a foothold here with the Storm Guard on the way forward, more Variag warriors, the Blood Trolls are in here as well, and none of the sort of mainline Harad infantry is really built for dealing with a heavy hitter like this. Combine that with the chariots, you could break the Harad infantry force and then start to move on to the more scattered elves, and still the dwarves are slowly but surely trying to make their way forwards, trying to put some pressure on the elven lines. They will get there eventually, but the losses they've taken on the way forward have been pretty substantial, and as if that wasn't enough, Ironfoot warriors getting charged by Lothlorien cavalry. It's been a solid performance thus far. Nothing has really gone the red team's way so far, but nothing will go your way if you're passive. Not that the red team are being passive, of course, but they kind of are with their chariots. And at some point you're going to have to throw caution to the wind, because they do need to change something. If they don't, this battle's only going to end one way. Karen Amroth Rangers also firing away now. All of the long-range missiles have really been transferred over to just poke and prod of all of those Candish units, which are neatly lining up to be shot. Nomadic Archers trying to do some more damage. I mean, going after the Ballista crew, but I think the Ballistas have already done their jobs at this point, and it's going to be handing the baton off to the rest of the blue team forces as to whether or not they're going to be successful elsewhere in the field. And I mean, all of the trollmen who I think initially were going to go over and go after the dwarves have doubled back and are instead going to try and help hold Khand at bay. Trollmen of Harad should be pretty good at dealing with their cousins, the Blood Trolls from Khand. Bigger and scarier they may be, but there's certainly more of the Trollman. Using those cleavers, the Wargoat chariots on the way back across. Indecision here may be costing the red team dearly. They had all of their cavalry ready to go. Are they going to be able to get over to the other side in time? I mean, Khand are doing well on the front line, well enough. But of course, without all of the chariots and without the cavalry there, that could be the green light for Harad to use their own heavy hitters in the form of those Mumakil. Sindar Blade Masters on the way across, showing the Variag warriors what a really impressive finesse-based swordsman is. And then of course you've got the more barbaric champions of Nafarat, which is certainly going to stop any hope that this little flanking move was going to have of achieving much. But the main line is still going reasonably well for Khand. For Hammerguard, I think he's moving in. I mean, the Wind Blades charging into some exposed Serpent Guard, causing them to become shaken, but not running just yet in the face of the very best that Khand have to offer. I mean, and perhaps something which is worth mentioning is the projectiles that all of these chariots have. Of course, both the Erebor and Khandish chariots have crossbowmen on their backs. Meanwhile, over here, the dwarves are finally going to start putting some direct pressure onto the Lothlorien positions. Throwing axes doing their thing. Serpent Guard, meanwhile, charging forwards. Going to get a pretty... oh, no, actually turning around in the end. Leaving the Galathrim nobles to continue to do some good damage to the Sons of Durin on the approach. Are they going to be able to get a volley of throwing axes off? I mean, the Kindred of Celeborn should still win that fight, but softening them up with a volley first of all. Actually, going after some units over there. Arrows flying back and forth. A bit of friendly fire here and there, but for the most part, all of the damage that the blue team want to do is landing. There's a lot of the Wind Riders back there. As soon as that cavalry is used, oof. Demons of the Desert, that's a fairly big loss, fairly neat destruction of them. Combination of the axe throws and crossbows presumably responsible for that, and the slightly undermanned elven front lines over here probably going to have issues in places against Erebor, in spite of the losses Erebor took on the way forwards. This little flanking force, so Lothlorien cavalry and a lot of these Galathrun warriors should make fairly quick work of Dwarven miners and Ironfoot warriors and secure this flank for the Blues. But could reinforcements be on the way? I mean, Candish cavalry is nearby, Staff Masters peeling off the Sons of Durin. There's still Sindar Blade Masters hidden in the backfields as well, so the Dwarves, it's an awkward fight for them. And now the Mumakil moving in, so this could be the moment. I mean, I mentioned earlier how the chariots were waiting, and if they had moved in to attack that infantry force, it could have been a real problem for Harad. But now that the Mumakil are in here, that could prove to be the other way round, although the Mumakil have been stopped largely dead in their tracks. Mumakil taking a lot of damage from missiles and in melee. It is a bit of a mess. Serpent Horse Archers, I don't think either side has really utilised their cavalry to the extent they would have wanted. The Lothlorien Lancers probably so far been the most impressive unit in that regard. Mumakil, I mean, it's not an ideal thing for them to be right in and amongst Nurad's Storm Guard, but they are really disrupting the lines here, and the chariots not doing that, it's worth mentioning. Really need to get these chariots in to do something. If they do that, momentum could be solidly theirs, especially seeing as how Lothlorien could end up being a little bit of a weird one for them. They do manage to get into the axe throws with their Serpent Guard, but the wind, or the Wind Riders are panned. Wind Blades. Sindar Blade Masters revealing themselves, the Haradrim Artillery doing the same sort of thing. That's probably going to be enough to rout that little flanking force. Lothlorien Cavalry still there, the Dwarves sort of flummoxed by this scattered elven defence in depth. Done pretty well at that. I think if it was just that battle over there, Lothlorien would bleed the Dwarves out over time, but it could be this fight over here which really has the most bearing on things, because there's still all of those chariots around. We haven't seen the Hwacha fire yet, but I suppose it was hyper-aggression, and the Hwacha is so unpredictable that unless you're sitting back and bombarding the enemy, it's not really going to be great for you. Galathrun Nobles, maybe the Hwacha could be utilised later on, but point blank fire. Serpent Horse Archers, very depleted, but Galathrun Riders on the way back over as well. Sindar Blade Masters getting in the way by default alongside the very few Serpent Horse Archers that remain. The Hammer Guard's still a real threat, but again, kind of bumping into units. Still one of those Mumakil in the backfield here, going to try and disrupt the support of the Nomadic Archers. Storm Guard struggling. Khan's infantry is running out of steam, and there's still plenty of support in behind here. The terrain, as limited as it is on the frozen lake bed, has been used by the blue team as well. Slightly higher ground for their supporting units to use. Dwarven miners. Galathrun Nobles continuing to fire, but unfortunately for the Nomadic Archers, they do their work over a longer period of time. They're not particularly damaging Archer. They're more there for the back and forth. So the red team are going to need some sort of victory on this side, I think, in the long run. And I don't think they're going to get it. The Dwarves, they did some good damage to Lothlorien, but Lothlorien were able to spread that damage out simply by positioning, really. And the damage the Dwarves took on the approach as well was also fairly substantial. Riders still back there. Galathrun warriors, I mean, very depleted dwarves going to try and join in on the front line now. I think may as well go up to full speed. Wind Riders trying to do some cycle charging, but this sort of cavalry pressure is the sort of thing I think the red team really needed to be putting on from the start. It would have been costly in some regards, but they ended up taking those losses anyway, I think, due to just hanging around in close proximity of all of those archers anyway. There's Gimli. The Hwacha crew, trying to get the Hwacha into a position to fire up the line, but Champions of Nafrat are going to get in their way, and that's a fight that, even with their huge curved blades, The Hwacha crew are not going to be able to be the scariest unit that Harad have to offer. Yeah, again, all of these chariots. I mean, Brotherhood of the Wain, only 6 remain at this point. It's possible, I suppose, that we've lost or missed some cavalry action. But here in the back lines, I mean, pressure has been put on, but too late, I think, from the red team. With this kind of composition, and you'd have thought it would have fallen into the red team's hands to be hyper-aggressive, send the infantry forward, and then try and do the business with cavalry around the back. But in the end, they hesitated, I think, only for a moment, but that's all it really took. The artillery did its work in short order, and you've seen glimpses of what maybe the Khandish cavalry could have been capable of here in the late game. There goes the Khandish general there. Unsung heroes, perhaps, the Khandish front line, which, to start with, I was a little bit concerned about, although the Khandish infantry force wasn't hugely substantial either, but Harad with their trollmen going off to help the dwarves and having a largely cavalry-focused force, I thought maybe the Serpent Guard Southron pikeman front line could be a little bit vulnerable to a really aggressive push, but in the end, it held up quite well to scrutiny. Batu's front line. And this is going to be 2 series wins out of 2 for Alexios and Batu. A great start to the tournament for them. They'll be hoping that that continues long term. Canned pretty much swept from the field now, their infantry largely gone. I think it's going to be an admission of defeat here. So I don't think they're going to be able to rout all of these units quickly enough. But that is going to be that. A good win. And again, I just think good execution. Good execution of their tactics here. In a very similar way, actually, to the last field battle we saw these two play in when they were Mirkwood and Rohan. Their plan A was solid. This time they, of course, were... Well, again, really, it was not sitting back entirely. It was, certainly in this case, with an artillery-focused initial army with 2 ballistas, they were implying that the other team would need to come forward. And then following on from that, it was how they then responded to the enemy attack. On this occasion, of course, it happened far quicker than last time. So it was a little bit faster and frenetic, and I think it could have backfired. I think if the red team had managed to use their chariots at the opportune moment, then the Harad infantry line in particular would have been in real trouble. And as much as the Mumakils did play a part, and in the end the Mumakil perhaps did their job at disrupting lines better than all of those chariots did, it could have been a real problem for Harad if their central infantry force of Serpent Guard and Southrons had fallen apart, and they were just left with a small force of trollmen and cavalry, because then the elves didn't really have the numbers to be able to take on 2 engagements at once, even though they started off on the right foot against Erebor because of all the damage the dwarves took at the hands of those ballista bolts early on. It could have gone pear-shaped for them, but again, the red team, based on how quick the battle was, the red team didn't hesitate that much with their chariots, but I think the window that they did, there was a small window in there, and they didn't unfortunately take advantage of it, and as a result, by the time they were getting aggressive with their cavalry, it was already a bit too late. They were already too damaged, and the forces the blue team had were still too healthy. So let's see what did the damage for Lothlorien. The ballista, as we mentioned, I mean, it's always a bit of a crapshoot with artillery like that. Even in a situation like this, where the situation is ideal for them to be used in exactly the way that you want them, sometimes they can miss, and it just doesn't do enough damage, really. But that wasn't the case this time. Both the Harad ballista and certainly the Elven ballista did a good amount of damage to the dwarves on the approach, and again, if that damage hadn't been present, the dwarves would have been able to set up their crossbows and throwing axes in support of their front line, and the defence in depth strategy, almost like a checkerboard effect that Lothlorien were going for, would have one by one been systematically destroyed. So again, it's one of those situations that could have turned around on them, but fortunately for them, their ballista did perform. Kindred of Celeborn did pretty well. Also, Galathram Nobles, I mean, that's not that many kills for the Galathram Nobles, considering they were pretty much a constant presence on the battlefield, spraying those Silverthorn arrows everywhere, but again, just knocking the enemy over and disrupting their rhythm was a big thing here. The red team were never really able to get a consistent bit of momentum. Sindar Blade Masters did well. Galathram Warriors actually in the end probably weren't as weren't as important as I was thinking they would be, especially against Erebor, because the more important thing was doing the damage on the approach and disrupting their rhythm more so than outperforming them with sheer armor piercing damage in melee. But they still got a decent amount of kills. 122 is still good. Karen Amroth Rangers did okay. Lothlorien Cavalry as well. Certainly early on they were really the only cavalry unit doing heavy lifting, and they were still a presence later on in the battle as well. They did peter out towards the end, but the early charges they got was still very good, especially against those crossbows, of course. So yeah, congratulations to Alexios and Batu, their second series win, so they've set themselves up very well for the tournament. I don't know actually how Wafflez and Tundrasfox did in round 1, but they certainly lost this round. So yeah, again, these will continue to trickle in, usually in the Wednesday slot for videos, and based on a change of job, which I will be going over in a channel update, or I might have already done so at this point, my schedule is far more settled now. I have a far better idea of what's going to be going on, so hopefully that will be beneficial to the channel, and we can start doing or nail down really a regular 2 videos per week schedule once again, instead of just the 1 that I was relegated to. And for the moment, of course, that's going to be tournament battles like this, and maybe mixed in with the occasional Last Alliance field battle as well. But again, that'll be a matter for a channel update more so than waffling at the end of one of these tourney battles. So yeah, congratulations to Alexios and Batu, commiserations to Wafflez and Tundrasfox. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.